Welcome everybody. We're back trying to do a demand and supply video, and this is going to be called Demand 1D and 2D, this video. So we're going to get started here, and I'm going to get behind the camera. Our assistants have a couple of emergencies today, so I'm going to try to hodgepodge around a little bit, and we're going to look at some stuff over here. Okay. So, once again, right, my name's Tommy, and we're trying to learn about the demand and supply model. And the demand and supply model is also referred to as the market model. Notice demand we have in green, supply in blue, so that's one of our themes. Sometimes people say that some of that stuff can help us. And it's the key to demand and supply model, buyers and sellers, to why free markets and capitalism works. Some people argue about how much it works, but I really believe markets can really help us a lot. So this is definitely very, very much low-tech and old school. And you know, like when your teacher used to say, hey, you have to do some long division by hand, right? Don't put those calculators away. So we're doing some stuff by hand. So this is video demand 1D and 2D together. And here's 1D right here. See if I can zoom in a little bit. Maybe you guys can pause this if you need to. But the files, this 1D file is a Word file. It'll be out there with the video file. And then here's 2D. We get into that crazy phrase where the change in quantity demand is totally different from change in demand. Let me say that again. 4 words, change in quantity demand is not the same thing as a change in demand. So we go and try and show that. In 2D, we especially emphasize the change in quantity demand with a graph on the left there, so we're going to add that in. And then there's some phrases there about how we graphically illustrate a change in quantity demand. And then we're going to talk about the slope of the demand curve, so we'll do some slope work. And as a matter of fact, there's another copy of 2D up there. So on the left, there's where we're going to do the graph. Sorry to be so weird with my camera stuff. I need my help, my assistance. And then we're going to do the slope work right next to the graph, just like the 2D handout. So hopefully you have these handouts. And if you get some green paper for demand and blue paper for supply, that would be awesome. Hey, on the back of 2D, why don't you take a moment and try to write down this stuff right here on the back of 2D. There's a tricky rule. Remember, change in quantity, this time I had demand first. Change in demand is not the same thing as a change in quantity demand. So 3-word phrase versus a 4-word phrase, and they mean totally different things, and that's how you guys can get all, if you guys are taking economics classes, you can get very, very much confused by the multiple choice questions. So how we illustrate them graphically, a change in quantity demand is graphically illustrated by a movement along the same demand curve, and we're going to show you that today in this video. The next video, not in today's video, but the next one, a change in demand is going to be graphically illustrated by a shift of the entire demand curve. And if we had a change in demand such that there was increase, we would shift the demand curve to the right. So you guys fill this one in for me. If you have a change in demand such that there's a decrease in demand, that would be a shift to the L word would be left. There you go. So shift right for the increase, shift left for the decrease. Okay, so let's come back over here. We're going to get ready to do 2D. But before we do that, let me see if I can get the camera lined up right. We are going to review some of the definitions in 1D. Okay, so literally, I'm going to read these to you. So some people also say a great learning technique that people have found out about is just listening. So if somehow you can get this video file on your iPlayer or some kind of file player, listening to these definitions will very much help. And remember, we have a learning model. That first couple of stages, we begin to build the base of every new model, every new subject area. We recognize and memorize new concepts, then we begin to understand them. Then there's a big jump when we start to apply them in graphs and formulas and stuff like that, okay? So, hearing the repetition of these terms will help you build the base and understand the model even more. So the definition of demand is a schedule or a table, in other words, of ordered pairs. But let's go back to the definition. Demand is a table or a curve displaying the amounts that consumers are willing and able to purchase at each price and a list of possible prices per some specified time period. So as we build this along, we'll continue back on that definition and see how it can be applied to the model and how it makes sense. But for now, they're the words. Quantity demand values are those amounts that consumers will buy at each price. A demand table is a list of ordered pairs of price, right, on the vertical axis, oops, over here, and quantity demand, right, on the horizontal axis. So a demand table is a list of ordered pairs of price and quantity demand coordinates estimated by marketing researchers and many other relevant experts, statisticians or economists or other just really, really knowledgeable everyday business people, right, can sometimes be very helpful there. A demand curve, on the other hand, is a graphical illustration of those ordered pairs, right? So you take each ordered pair and you plot that point, the next ordered pair, plot that point, and then the curve, you just connect all of the points that you've obtained from the demand table. And again, the demand table is estimated by the experts, the market research experts that help us. The slope of the demand curve, it's negatively sloped. As we move from left to right, a demand curve is going to fall, right? It's going to fall to illustrate that when price goes up, quantity demand goes down, the amount that we want to buy. And that just makes common sense, doesn't it? If we use dramatic changes in price, if price doubled for your favorite summer dress or your favorite tennis shoes, right, we wouldn't be able to buy as much, kind of thing. Now, on the other hand, if there's a BOGO sale, buy one, get one free, or in other words, a 50% sale, if prices come down by 50%, the amount we buy goes up. So the variables go in different directions, and mathematically that's said to be a negative slope. We're going to talk about that. Now, that negative relationship between price and quantity demand is something called the law of demand. And it's so important, that relationship, that it's called the law of demand. Again, when price goes up, quantity demand comes down. Price goes up, quantity demand comes down. Vice versa. Price goes down, quantity demand goes up. That's negatively related to those variables. Now, other things equal. Price is not the only variable that impacts the buying decision. But when we look at the axes, we only have price and quantity. The other variables that come into play are called determinants of demand. And that's what we start studying in 3D. And 4D is the graphical illustration of a change in demand that occurs when we change a determinant of demand. Okay, so that's the work for the next video. And then remember, our graphical illustration statements, a change in quantity demand is graphically illustrated by a movement along the same demand curve. We'll show that in a moment here. And a change in demand is graphically illustrated by a shift of the entire demand curve. Okay, so there's our definitions. Maybe you could pause those and replay them a couple of times and see if that'll help you reread them. Again, this will be 1D, this is a Word file. 2D is actually an Excel file, that'll come along with it too. So you can use these and then just write right on the files, but I'm going to write on the board so it's a little bit bigger. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is draw the shell when we draw the demand supply model. Excuse my glasses. We want to draw the axis, the vertical axis, and then the horizontal axis, and where they meet together is the 0 point. Remember quadrant 1 of the Cartesian plane geometry, because we're both variables in the business world and the economics world are going to be positive, right? So then we label quantity, Q for quantity per period of time, and then we're going to label P for price expressed in terms of dollars in the United States, right? We use dollars as our currency. Now, there's a bit more to this, but we're just going to jump right into it. we would have to get this perfect, we would want to use graph paper. We'd want to get that demand table of ordered pairs. But I know in general, demand curves are going to be negatively sloped. So the way we illustrate that, as we move from left to right, the demand curve will fall. And we'll just label that big D for demand, okay? Then we're going to pick a couple of points on the demand curve and label the ordered pairs, not with numbers, just with, you know, P's and Q's kind of stuff. So if I have point 1, and I go, when I move around in the graph, I always want to move in perpendicular or right angle movements, okay? So I'm going to go perpendicular over to the price axis, and we're going to label that P1 from point 1, okay? And perpendicular down to the quantity axis, perpendicular, 90 degrees down, right? We're going to label that point. It's quantity, but it's coming from the demand curve. So we have to label that QD, and it's coming from point 1, so we're going to call it QD1. Okay? Now, what if I pick a second point and just call that point 2? What do you think the perpendicular going over to the price is going to be? Well, why don't we just call it P2? And then the quantity would be what? Quantity demand 2. Okay. So when we go from quantity demand 1 to quantity demand 2, that is the 4-word phrase, change in quantity demand. The only variable that will cause a change in the quantity demand of summer dresses, so this is the market for summer dresses, the only variable that would cause that change in quantity demand is a change in the price of summer dresses. And that's the phrase that we have on the 2D, right, in the big box, right? The only variable that will cause a change in the quantity demand of summer dresses, a change in the quantity demand. So how do we go from QD1 to QD2? We would have to go from point 1 to point 2. Well, the only way that can happen is if the price goes from P1 down to P2. Does that make sense? So if we go from point 1 to point 2, quantity demand changes from QD1 to QD2. What caused it? Price came from P1 down to P2. When price came down, quantity demand went up. If we reversed it, if we went from point 2 back to point 1, price would go up, quantity demand would go from QD2 to QD1. That quantity demand would go down. When price goes up, quantity demand goes down. Okay, and then vice versa holds true. If price goes down, quantity demand goes up. That's the law of demand, right? So the negatively sloped demand curve, as we move from left to right, it falls, is the law of demand. It's just the picture of the law of demand, right? And along the way, we're going to notice a couple other background things. For one thing we're going to notice is this tricky phrase, change in quantity demand. We moved along the same axis. If price comes down, we move along to the new price, and quantity demand goes up. And that's the 4-word phrase, change in quantity demand, okay? A movement along the same axis. Now, let's prove a little bit more about the slope, okay? A little bit of slope work. So, what if we go from point 1 to point 2? Let's see what happens, okay? Do you remember from math classes, slope is a ratio of a change in y over change in x kind of thing. But we don't have y's and x's anymore. We have p's and q's. So slope is going to be a change in price divided by change in quantity demand. And let's see about the directional changes and see if that can prove something about slope, right? This goofy thing, slope. What the heck does that mean about real world business stuff? Well, it actually can mean a lot, you know, but let's just review it a little bit. If we go from point 1 to point 2, price goes from P1, would have had to have gone from P1 to P2. So price goes down. Is that a positive or negative change? Yes, correct. So that's a negative change. When we go from point 1 to point 2, quantity demand, on the other hand, goes from QD1 to QD2. That's an increase in quantity demand. So that's going to be a positive change. And what happens in math when we have two different signs in the top of the fraction versus the bottom? The top, remember, is called the numerator, and the bottom is called the denominator. Right? So overall, that's going to be a negative value, that slope. Negatively sloped. So we did it right. We drew the demand curve correctly. As we move from left to right, the demand curve falls, illustrating the negative relationship between price and quantity demand. Okay? Now, you could say, well, I sort of fixed it that way, but let's prove it. Let's go backwards. What if somehow we started off at point 2 and then went to point 1? Well, the only way that would happen is if the price was at P2 and then went to P1. Well, P2 to P1 is an increase in the price. Well, let's take a look. Remember, delta means change in. We talked about that before. Change in price, not Y. We're going to do price over change in quantity demand. And now the price goes up, so that's a positive change. P2 to P1, positive change, it's going up. But quantity demand goes from point 2, QD2, point 1, 2 to 1, right? QD2 goes to QD1 because we're going from point 2 to point 1 because price went up. All connects, right? So the change in quantity demand then is going to be a decrease or a negative change. So once again, the ratio has different signs, and therefore the overall value will be negative. Okay? So there's some stuff about slope, some phrase about the change in quantity demand, and we know we stay on the same demand curve when we have a change in quantity demand. Does that make sense? Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'm just going to do a couple more things. I'm just going to do a quick review again to jump in behind the camera. Remember, you guys, there's our Cartesian plane geometry space, and we're going to be going in quadrant 1 there, right? Except we're doing P's and Q's instead of Y and X. Now, again, you can put this on pause, but I'm going to let you remind you of some of the symbols again. D for demand, S for supply, right? P and Q. The PE values in the next couple of videos are going to do more equilibrium stuff. QS stands for quantity supply. We got to do some more stuff about quantity supply. So I'm going to do this quickly. And then once more, a reminder, we got to build the base by getting the definitions down. You guys got to do that work. I can't come home with you and do the repetition. You got to study the phrases, reread them. Some people rewrite definitions. Whatever your great repetitive study skills are, you got to put the time in and build the base by recognizing and memorizing the new terms. Then you begin to understand it. I am going to be able to help you with the applications. That's what my videos are going to do. And in introductory classes, most of the work is at the application level. Okay? So you guys got to do the building of the base for me, okay, by that stuff. And thank you very much. I'll see you next time with some more demand and supply, and eventually we'll do some other stuff too. Thank you guys. Bye-bye now.